The champagne glass shattered before Alexander Dawson even realized he dropped it. Crystal fragments scattered across Italian marble. $400 worth of vintage Dom Perignon pooling between the shards like liquid gold. Wasted. But Alexander wasn't looking at the mess. He was staring at his hand, his right hand, the one that had signed billion-dollar contracts, the one that had built an empire from nothing, and it was trembling, uncontrollably. Not from fear, from something far worse. The neurologist's words from 3 hours ago still echoed in the cathedral-like silence of his penthouse. 6 months, maybe less. The tumor is inoperable. I'm sorry, Mr. Dawson. 6 months, 180 days, 4,320 hours. And somewhere in this city, beneath the canopy of Christmas lights now glittering across the skyline like millions of false promises, 2 children existed. 2 6-year-old children who didn't know that their father was one of the wealthiest men in the country, who didn't know he thought about them every single day, who didn't know that in approximately 6 months he would be gone forever, and they would never get the chance to meet him. What those children also didn't know, what their mother had made sure they would never know, was that Alexander Dawson had abandoned them before they were even born, that he had walked away from the only woman he'd ever loved because he believed he was too damaged, too broken, too incapable of being the father they deserved. And now, standing alone in a penthouse worth $47 million, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered, Alexander realized something that made his hands shake even harder. He had waited too long. But what he didn't know yet, what he couldn't possibly know as he stood there in his designer suit, bleeding inside from a disease that would steal everything, was that the next 3 months would teach him a lesson about timing, truth, and the unbearable cost of choosing fear over love. The clock was already ticking, and time, unlike money, could not be bought back. December 17th, 8 days until Christmas. Alexander Dawson stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking down at a city that never stopped moving. From the 42nd floor, the streets looked like rivers of light. Red taillights flowing one direction, white headlights the other. The arteries of a city alive with purpose and motion. He felt none of it. The penthouse was silent in the way that only extreme wealth can buy. No street noise, no neighbors, no voices. Just the barely perceptible hum of the climate control system and the distant sound of his own breathing. Everything in this space was expensive. Nothing in this space was loved. Alexander caught his reflection in the window. At 45, he was still conventionally handsome, sharp jawline, dark hair silvering at the temples. He wore a Tom Ford suit tailored to his exact measurements. His watch was a Patek Philippe bought with his own money because he had no family heirlooms to inherit or to pass forward. The thought made something twist in his chest. Before we go deeper into Alexander's story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications. This is a 3-part story, and if you don't subscribe, you might miss what happens when he finally faces those children, when the truth comes out, when time runs out. Subscribe now. You'll want to see how this ends. Now, let me tell you about the secret Alexander kept in his desk drawer. In the top drawer of Alexander's desk, a custom piece made from reclaimed wood and steel that cost more than a luxury car, there was a folder. It was the only thing in his penthouse that his housekeeper was forbidden to touch. The only object he'd ever told his assistant to leave alone. The only possession he'd owned that money hadn't purchased, but guilt had. He walked to the desk now, his hand still trembling slightly, and pulled open the drawer. The folder was thin, just a few pieces of paper, but those pages contained the only evidence that Alexander Dawson's life had ever produced anything meaningful. The first page was a birth certificate. 2 birth certificates, actually, printed on the same sheet because they'd been born within minutes of each other. Oliver James Bennett, born June 14th, 6:47 a.m., weight 5 pounds 3 ounces. Sophia Grace Bennett, born June 14th, 6:52 a.m., weight 5 pounds 1 ounce. Twins. A boy and a girl. Their mother had named them alone, in a hospital room Alexander had never entered, had held them alone, had brought them home to an apartment Alexander had never visited. Father's name on the birth certificate, unknown. Not because Willa didn't know, but because Alexander had asked her, begged her to leave it blank. The second page was a photograph, one of many he'd collected over the years, printed from social media accounts he checked obsessively but never interacted with. Willa had strict privacy settings, but her best friend didn't, and occasionally photos slipped through. This one was his favorite. Last Christmas, almost a year ago now. 2 children, 5 years in the photo, standing in front of a Christmas tree, holding hands and grinning at the camera. They'd be 6 now. A whole year older. A whole year he'd missed. The boy had Alexander's dark hair and serious eyes. The girl had Willa's smile in the same dimple in the left cheek that appeared when she laughed. They were beautiful. They were strangers. And in 6 months, maybe less, they would exist in a world where their father had lived and died without ever speaking to them. Alexander set the photo down, his hands shaking harder now. Not from the tumor, from the weight of what he'd done. The third page was a letter. He'd written it 4 years ago on their 2nd birthday, in a moment of weakness when guilt had overwhelmed him. He'd never sent it. Dear Oliver and Sophia, you don't know me. By the time you're old enough to read this, you might never know me. But I want you to know that I think about you every day. I made a choice before you were born, a choice to stay away. I told myself it was because I couldn't be the father you deserved, that I was too broken, too damaged, too incapable of love. I told myself I was protecting you. But the truth is, I was protecting myself, and I'm sorry. The letter went on, but Alexander couldn't read the rest. Not tonight. Not with the ghost of the neurologist's voice still in his head. 6 months. He closed the folder and returned it to the drawer. For 6 years, that drawer had been enough. A place to keep the secret, a place to contain the guilt, a place to avoid the consequence of the choice he'd made. But time, as it turned out, had a way of making drawers irrelevant. Alexander Dawson's life looked, from the outside, like the American dream. Self-made billionaire, featured in Forbes, respected, feared, admired. What they didn't write about in Forbes was that he'd built that empire on a foundation of absolute emotional isolation. Orphaned at 4, swallowed by the foster care system. 7 homes in 10 years, some fine, some nightmares, none permanent. He learned early that attachment was a liability, that the only person he could rely on was himself. At 14, a wealthy couple adopted him. For 4 years, he played the perfect son, perfect grades, perfect gratitude. Then, 3 weeks before his 18th birthday, they sat him down and explained that the adoption had been a learning experience for their biological son, that it was time for Alexander to make his own way. They didn't say the quiet part out loud. You were never really ours. But Alexander heard it. He left with a diploma, a backpack, and a rage so cold it could have frozen the sun. He poured that rage into work. First business at 18, first million at 21, first 100 million by 30, billionaire by 35. And by 40, he was completely, utterly alone. He told himself he preferred it that way, that solitude was power, that attachment was weakness. Then he met Willa Bennett. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Dawson wanted something more than money. He wanted her.
The headaches had started 3 months ago. At first, Alexander had dismissed them. Stress, too much screen time, not enough sleep. He'd taken ibuprofen and ignored them. But they got worse. Blinding, stabbing pain that would come out of nowhere and leave him gasping. Pain that made him cancel meetings. Pain that made him vomit in his office bathroom and then rinse his mouth and go back to work because acknowledging weakness felt like death. 2 weeks ago, he'd had his first seizure. He'd been alone in the penthouse, reviewing quarterly reports, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. He remembered the sensation of falling, the taste of copper in his mouth, and then nothing. He'd woken up 20 minutes later on the floor, his face pressed against cold marble, his body aching like he'd been hit by a car. That's when he'd finally gone to the doctor. That's when they'd found the tumor. Glioblastoma multiforme, a name that sounded like a spell from a fantasy novel, but was actually a death sentence written in Latin. The neurologist had been kind but direct. Surgery isn't an option. The tumor is located in an area we can't access without causing catastrophic damage. Radiation and chemotherapy might buy you a few extra weeks, but the side effects would be severe. Some patients choose palliative care and focus on quality of life for the time they have left. How much time? Alexander had asked. 6 months, maybe less. And just like that, everything had changed. Not gradually, not over time, but in one single moment. Alexander Dawson, the man who had spent his entire life building an empire to prove he didn't need anyone, suddenly had an expiration date. And the only thing he could think about, the only thing that mattered now, were the 2 children he'd never met. The twins who had his eyes and Willa's smile. The family he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. Time was running out. And for the first time in his life, Alexander Dawson couldn't buy, strategize, or work his way out of the problem. He could only face it.
Willa Bennett's number had been saved in Alexander's phone for 6 years under the name Do Not Call. He'd typed it in the day the twins were born, the day she'd sent him a single text message. They're here. A boy and a girl. We're fine. Don't contact me. He'd respected that boundary. For 6 years, he'd respected it. But now, standing in his penthouse with a terminal diagnosis and a ticking clock, Alexander realized that respect had been cowardice in disguise. He stared at her number for 20 minutes before his thumb finally moved. The phone rang 4 times. He'd almost convinced himself she wouldn't answer, that the number had changed, that she'd blocked him, that the universe was telling him to give up. And then, hello? Her voice. He hadn't heard it in 6 years, but it hit him like a physical blow. Warm, careful, guarded. Willa. Silence. Then, cold as winter. How did you get this number? You gave it to me 6 years ago, and you told me not to use it. Alexander closed his eyes. I know. So why are you calling? There were 1,000 ways to answer that question, 1,000 explanations, justifications, apologies, but Alexander had spent his entire life hiding behind carefully constructed words, and he was suddenly, desperately tired. I want to meet them, he said quietly. The twins. I want to meet my children. The silence on the other end was so complete he thought she'd hung up. Then, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have children, Alexander. You made that very clear 6 years ago. Willa. No. Her voice was shaking now, but not with sadness, with anger, with 6 years of anger that had been waiting for this moment. You don't get to do this. You don't get to call me out of nowhere and suddenly decide you want to be a father. That's not how this works. I know I don't deserve. You're right. You don't. Please. The word came out raw, desperate. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to let me back into your life. I need to see them. Just once. Why? The question was sharp, cutting. Why now, Alexander? What changed? He could tell her the truth, could tell her about the tumor, the diagnosis, the 6 months, could use his dying as leverage, as manipulation, as the ultimate guilt trip. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was the knowledge that if he told her he was dying, any chance of a real connection would be poisoned by pity. I made a mistake, he said instead. 6 years ago, I made a mistake, and I can't undo it. But I'm asking you, begging you, for a chance to correct it. Even a little, even just enough to meet them. Willa was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was tired, resigned, but not soft. They don't know about you. I told them their father wasn't in the picture, that he couldn't be part of their lives. What did you tell them about why? I told them the truth, that you chose not to be. Alexander flinched. Willa. If you want to meet them, she continued, her voice hardening, you're going to answer their questions. You're going to explain to a 6-year-old boy and a 6-year-old girl why you've been gone their entire lives. And if you hurt them, if you walk into their lives and then disappear again, I will make sure you regret it for whatever time you have left. The words hung in the air. Whatever time you have left. She didn't know how accurate that statement was. I won't hurt them, Alexander said quietly. I promise. Your promises don't mean anything to me. Then let me prove it, please. Another long silence. Then, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park near the fountain. I'll bring them. You get 1 hour, and if you're even 1 minute late, we're gone. I'll be there. Alexander. Her voice cracked just slightly, just enough to remind him that once, a lifetime ago, she'd loved him. Don't make me regret this. The line went dead. Alexander stood there, phone in hand, his heart racing. Tomorrow. He would meet his children tomorrow. And he had less than 24 hours to figure out how to be a father to 2 children who had every reason to hate him. I want you to stop for a second and think about this. If you were Alexander, if you'd abandoned your children and then tried to come back, what would you say to them? How do you explain 6 years of absence to a child who doesn't understand time yet, who doesn't understand fear or self-protection, or the ways trauma makes us hurt the people we love? Drop a comment and tell me, can a man like Alexander be forgiven, or is there a point where you wait too long and the door closes forever? Now, let's see what happened when he tried to walk through that door.
Alexander didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, playing out tomorrow's meeting in his mind 1,000 different ways. Each scenario ended badly. They would hate him. They would cry. They would ask questions he couldn't answer. Willow would see through him, see the tumor, see the death, and she would take them away. Or worse, they would like him. They would attach to him. And then in 6 months, they would lose him, and it would be his fault again. By 3 a.m., Alexander gave up on sleep. He walked to his office, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folder again. This time, he didn't just look at the birth certificates and the photo. He pulled out the pages underneath, the ones he usually avoided. Medical records from 7 years ago, the night that changed everything. Alexander had been 38, already a billionaire, though the money meant nothing compared to what he was building with Willa. They'd been dating for 8 months, the first relationship he'd ever allowed himself to believe might last. And then, Marcus Chen, a business rival who'd lost a major contract to Alexander's firm, had decided that professional revenge wasn't enough. The attack had happened in a parking garage. 3 men, baseball bats. Marcus wanted Alexander hurt, humiliated, destroyed. The attack had happened. The men had done their job. Alexander woke up in a hospital 3 days later with a fractured skull, broken ribs, internal bleeding, and damage that the doctors had explained with clinical detachment. The trauma had left him with severe dysfunction. The doctors had been blunt: nerve damage, psychological trauma, physical scarring. Intercourse would be difficult, possibly impossible. Fathering children was, in their professional opinion, extremely unlikely. For 6 months after the attack, Alexander had proven them right. Every attempt with Willa had ended in frustration, humiliation. She'd been patient, understanding, but eventually they'd stopped trying, stopped being intimate at all. Which is why when Willa called him 6 months after the attack, her voice shaking, and told him she was pregnant, Alexander's first reaction hadn't been joy. It had been confusion, then suspicion. "I just came from the doctor, Alexander. I'm pregnant, almost 3 months along." "We haven't. In months. It can't be mine." The silence on the other end had been devastating. "There was that one night, 3 months ago, after your birthday. You'd been drinking, and we—" "That didn't count. It wasn't— I couldn't." "Apparently you could." Her voice shook. "I didn't realize until I started showing. I thought I was just gaining weight from stress, but the doctor confirmed it today. I'm pregnant, Alexander, with twins." "Are you sure it's—" "Don't." Her voice went cold. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." But he had. Not out loud. In his head, where the doubt lived. For 2 weeks, Alexander ignored her calls, convinced she was lying, convinced this was some elaborate trap, convinced that trusting her would only lead to more pain. And then she showed up at his office with an ultrasound photo. 2 heartbeats. Twins. The doctor had later explained that trauma-induced dysfunction wasn't always permanent, that in rare cases partial function could return unpredictably, that one successful encounter, however brief, was all it took. "Congratulations, Mr. Dawson. You're going to be a father."
Alexander looked at the ultrasound image, two tiny blobs of gray and white, barely recognizable as human, and felt nothing but terror. He was broken, damaged, incapable of being what they needed. He would fail them. He would hurt them. He would become like every adult who'd ever abandoned him. So he made a choice. He told Willa he didn't want to be a father, that he couldn't do it, that she'd be better off without him. She cried. She begged him to reconsider. She told him she loved him and that they could figure it out together. And he'd walked away. Because walking was the only thing Alexander Dawson had ever been good at.
Morning came too fast and too slow. Alexander stood in front of his closet, staring at rows of expensive suits, and realized he had no idea what a father was supposed to wear to meet his children for the first time. Not a suit, too formal, too distant. Not athletic wear, he'd look like he was trying too hard. He settled on dark jeans and a sweater. Casual, but intentional. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a stranger. A dying man pretending to be a father. The drive to Riverside Park took 20 minutes. Alexander arrived 45 minutes early and sat in his car watching the fountain from a distance. The park was decorated for Christmas. Lights wrapped around trees, a massive wreath hanging from the gazebo. Families everywhere. Children running, laughing, pulling parents toward the playground. Alexander's hands were shaking again. Not from the tumor, from fear. At 9:55 a.m., he saw her. Willa. She looked exactly the same and completely different. Still beautiful. Beautiful, actually. Her hair was longer. She wore a winter coat and jeans, practical and warm. She walked with purpose, one hand holding a small girl's hand, the other resting on a boy's shoulder. The twins. Alexander's breath caught. They were real. He'd seen photos, but photos were flat, distant, easy to compartmentalize. This was different. Oliver wore a blue jacket and kept looking up at Willa, asking questions Alexander couldn't hear. Sophia skipped beside them, her hair in two braids, her smile bright and unguarded. They were real. They were his, and they had no idea who he was. Alexander got out of the car. Willa saw him immediately. Her expression didn't change, but her hand tightened on Sophia's. He walked toward them slowly, carefully, like approaching a wild animal that might bolt. When he was 10 feet away, Willa stopped. The twins stopped with her, looking up at him with identical expressions of curiosity. Oliver? Sophia? Willa's voice was steady, but Alexander heard the tremor underneath. This is someone I want you to meet. Who is he? Sophia asked, tilting her head. Willa looked at Alexander. This was the moment where he could tell the truth, where he could say, "I'm your father," but the words stuck in his throat. Because what right did he have to that title? What claim could he make after 6 years of absence?
"My name is Alexander," he said quietly, crouching down so he was at their eye level. "That's a long name," Oliver said, seriously. "It is," Alexander agreed. "You can call me Alex if you want." "Why are we meeting you?" Sophia asked, direct in the way only children can be. Alexander looked at Willa. She said nothing. This was his test. "Because," he said slowly, choosing each word carefully, "because I'm someone who should have been in your life from the beginning, but I wasn't, and I'm sorry for that." Oliver frowned. "Why weren't you?" "Because I made a mistake." "What kind of mistake?" "The kind that hurt people I care about." Sophia stepped closer, studying his face. "Are you our dad?" The question hung in the air. Willa's expression was unreadable. Alexander's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am." Oliver and Sophia looked at each other. Some silent communication passed between them. Then Oliver said, "Our friend Emma's dad left and then came back. Emma says he smells like beer now and yells a lot." "I don't drink beer, and I won't yell." "Do you have a good reason," Sophia asked, "for leaving?" Did he? He'd thought so at the time. He'd convinced himself that staying away was noble, protective, selfless. But looking at them now, these two small humans who existed because of him and in spite of him, Alexander realized there was no good reason. There was only fear, and fear was the worst reason of all. "No," he said honestly, "I don't have a good reason." Something shifted in Willa's expression. Not forgiveness, but something softer than anger. "Can we go play now?" Sophia asked, already looking toward the playground. Willa nodded. "Stay where I can see you." The twins ran off, hand in hand, leaving Alexander and Willa standing alone by the fountain.
"They took that better than I expected," Alexander said quietly. The next 40 minutes were the strangest of Alexander's life. He pushed Sophia on the swings. He helped Oliver climb the monkey bars. He answered questions. "Why is your watch so shiny? Do you have a dog? Can you do a handstand?" With a mixture of honesty and awkward humor. And for 40 minutes, Alexander Dawson forgot he was dying. For 40 minutes, he was just a man spending time with his children. But at minute 41, everything changed. He was standing at the base of the slide, waiting to catch Sophia when the headache hit. Not a normal headache, the kind that felt like his skull was splitting open. He stumbled backward, his vision blurring at the edges. "Alex?" Sophia's voice, high and worried. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he managed, but his words slurred slightly. Willa was there in an instant, her hand on his arm. "Alexander, look at me." He tried, but the world was tilting sideways. "Kids, go sit on that bench, now," Willa said, her voice calm but firm. Oliver and Sophia obeyed, their faces frightened. "What's wrong with you?" Willa asked, her voice low. "Just a headache. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're barely standing." The pain was already receding, the way it always did. As suddenly as it appeared, it began to fade. Alexander straightened, blinking until his vision cleared. "I'm okay. It's passing." Willa stared at him. That wasn't just a headache. It was. "Alexander, what aren't you telling me?" Everything. He wasn't telling her everything. "I've been stressed," he said. "Working too much, not sleeping, it's nothing." She didn't believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But before she could press further, Sophia appeared at his side, small hand tugging on his sleeve. "Are you sick?" she asked, her eyes wide. "No, sweetheart, I'm fine." "My friend Jacob gets headaches, and his mom says it's because his brain is growing. Is your brain growing?" Despite everything, Alexander almost smiled. "Something like that." Oliver joined them, quieter, more observant. "You should go to a doctor." "I have," Alexander said. "They're taking good care of me." Willa's expression hardened. She knew he was lying, but she didn't say anything, not in front of the twins. "I think it's time for us to go," she said instead. "Already?" Sophia's face fell. "We've been here over an hour, honey, and Alex needs to rest." "Can he come back?" Oliver asked, looking between them. "Can we see him again?" Willa looked at Alexander, and he saw the war happening behind her eyes. She wanted to protect them, but she also wanted to give them a father. And she had no idea that the clock was ticking faster than any of them realized. "We'll see," Willa said carefully. "That means no," Oliver said, his face falling. "That means we'll talk about it. Now say goodbye." Sophia hugged Alexander's legs. Oliver waved awkwardly. And then they were gone, walking back toward the parking lot, leaving Alexander standing alone by the fountain. He watched them until they disappeared from sight. Then he walked back to his car, got in, and sat in silence. His phone buzzed, a reminder from his neurologist's office. Follow-up appointment scheduled, December 23rd, 900 hours. 5 days from now. 2 days before Christmas. 5 days to figure out how to tell Willa the truth before his body told it for him. Because that headache in the park, that was a warning. The tumor was growing. Time was collapsing. And Alexander Dawson had just made a promise he might not be able to keep.
That night, Alexander sat in his penthouse and made a list. Not a business plan, not a strategy document. A list of things he wanted to give his children before he died. Things I want them to know. I thought about them every day. Leaving was my failure, not theirs. They deserved better. I'm sorry. Things I want them to have. Trust fund, already established. Letters for their 18th birthdays. Photos of me so they remember. The truth about why I left. That last one stopped him. The truth. Which truth? The truth about the attack? About his trauma? About believing he was too broken to be a father? Or the truth about the tumor, about the diagnosis, about the fact that he was dying? If he told them about the tumor, every moment they spent together would be colored with grief. They would know him only as the tragic father, the father they were about to lose. If he didn't tell them, they would build a relationship on a foundation of lies. And when he died, when the inevitable came, they would feel betrayed again. There was no good choice. There was only the choice that hurt less, or the choice that hurt different. At 11 p.m., his phone rang. Willa. Are you going to tell me the truth, or are you going to keep lying? She asked without preamble. I don't know with your... You collapsed in a park, Alexander, in front of our children. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending it was stress. Silence. If you're dying, Willa said quietly, I need to know, because I'm not letting you walk into their lives just to traumatize them when you die. Alexander closed his eyes. This was the moment where he could tell her everything, where he could ask for help, where he could stop carrying this alone. Or the moment where he could protect what little time he had left. I've seen a neurologist, he said carefully. I've been having headaches. They're running tests. Not a lie, but not the truth. What kind of tests? The thorough kind. Alexander, I'll know more after my next appointment. I promise I'll tell you then. Another long silence. If you're using a medical crisis to manipulate your way into their lives, I'm not. Then what
are you doing?" "I'm trying," Alexander said, his voice breaking. "I'm trying to be a father, even if I have no idea how, even if I'm doing it badly. I'm trying." He heard Willa's breath catch. "The kids want to see you again," she said finally. "They've been asking about you all evening." Alexander's heart lurched. "They have?" "Sophia wants to know if you can come to her school's Christmas concert. Oliver wants to show you his Lego collection." She paused. "I told them maybe." "I want to see them," Alexander said immediately. "Whenever you'll let me." "Christmas Eve," Willa said. "We're having dinner at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just us and the kids. If you want to come, you can. I'll be there." "Alexander," her voice softened just slightly, "I meant what I said. If you hurt them, I'll—" "I know." "Do you?" "I won't hurt them, Willa, I swear." "You already did 6 years ago, so what you mean is you won't hurt them again." The words landed like a blow. Because she was right. He'd already hurt them. The question was whether he could avoid doing it twice. After they hung up, Alexander sat in the dark, staring at his list. "The truth about why I left." He picked up a pen and added one more line. "The truth about why I came back." Then he crossed it out. Because that truth, the diagnosis, the tumor, the ticking clock, was the one thing he couldn't tell them. Not yet. Not when they just started to look at him like he might, possibly, be someone worth knowing. He would go to Christmas Eve dinner. He would meet them at the school concert. He would build something real, even if it was temporary. And when the time came, when the tumor took away his ability to hide, he would tell them the truth. But not before. Not when there was still time left to be something other than the dying father. Alexander Dawson had made a lot of choices in his life. Most of them had been driven by fear. This one was no different. But this time, the fear was not of commitment. It was of running out of time. And as he sat there in his tomb of glass and marble, surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered, Alexander realized something that made his chest ache. He'd spent his whole life trying to prove he didn't need anyone. And now, with 6 months left to live, the only thing he wanted was to be needed by 2 children who barely knew his name. The clock was ticking. Christmas was coming, and Alexander Dawson was running out of time to become the father he never been. This is where part 1 ends. But the story isn't over. Alexander has 6 months to live. The twins don't know. Willa doesn't know. And Christmas Eve dinner is 6 days away. In part 2, the truth starts to crack. The tumor gets worse. The children start asking questions, and Alexander has to make an impossible choice. Tell them he's dying and risk destroying the fragile relationship they're building, or keep lying and hope he doesn't collapse in front of them again. Here's what I need you to do. Subscribe right now. Part 2 drops tomorrow, and you don't want to miss it. Hit the like button if this story made you feel something, and drop a comment answering this question. If you were Alexander, would you tell the children the truth about your illness, or would you protect them from it for as long as you could? Tell me what you'd do, because in part 2, Alexander has to decide, and his choice will change everything. I'll see you in part 2.